So similar to the topic of responsibilities is also service level agreements, SLAs. And if you are promising certain things to your customers, or your customer expects certain promises to be made, you need to be very wary of what the cloud provider will give you in terms of those responsibilities. If the cloud provider is guaranteeing you, a 99% uptime on a particular service, then generally you would not be able to offer more than that to your customer, because again, you don't have the ability to control these things. Even things like scaling and redundancy is all fully managed. So you're very much limited to the promises the cloud provider makes to you in terms of what you can promise the customers. Now, some of the more cutting edge and the newer services, they might not even have an SLA or a very, very basic one. So it's definitely something to look at before developing anything for a client. A challenge of serverless is around scaling. So scaling is fully managed, and often there are no real limits in place. A lot of these services can scale practically forever and automatically. And so this sounds like a benefit, and it is to some extent. But imagine, for example, that you have a user and they go and upload 50 terabytes of data. Now they're only limited by their internet connection. They can get that into your cloud. And that sounds like a great benefit until you get the bill at the end of the month and you're paying for 50 terabytes of storage. So it's really important with serverless to build these kind of monitoring and these controls and the ability to put some brakes on these kind of activities and within the application itself. In some cases, some of the services can be configured with these kind of limits, but this is something you would have to be proactively doing, not just assume that these limits are in place. That can be very costly. In a server-based application, if you're going to do operational cost estimates, you will look at the server. You know the price of a server per month. You may know how many servers that you need to meet the user requirements that you have. And so you can have an idea quite quickly what that's going to cost per month. And there's some supporting services and stuff that need to be factored in, but generally this is a fairly quick exercise. With serverless, it's a bit more complex than that, and this can be quite challenging. So if you're paying per request and you're paying per microsecond of runtime, you can imagine that these services have many more and much smaller parameters that are used in estimation. It's not just here's a server, there's the cost. It's here's 20 services that you're using. Each one of these has 3 to 4 factors that impact the cost. So all these parameters you need to consider when you're doing your estimation. On top of that, because it's so detailed, you also need to have much more precise estimates as to how many users you're going to have and the activity that those users are going to have on average to give you sort of that estimation. So serverless cost estimation spreadsheets tend to be rather large. A lot of parameters in there, a lot of research that needs to be done to come up with these calculations. That can be challenging, certainly time consuming. The last challenge that I want to cover here is service limits. And service limits are limits that are imposed on cloud services, and there's 2 types. There's soft limits, which are generally there to stop abuse of new accounts, and you can request the cloud provider to raise those limits to an extent. And then you have hard limits, which are just limitations of the technology itself. And it's really, really crucial to look at the documentation of any service before you use it to understand what those limits are and how they may impact your requirements. And not just your current requirements, but your future ones. Will this scale over time as you need it to? Because if you run into some of these limits, it's going to be problematic. Now, from my experience, hard limits tend to be a way for the cloud provider to indicate what they intend this service to be used for. So if you run into those, it could be you're not using the right service for that particular job. So you could have a look if there's other services that might be able to do this in a better way.